Dobar dan. I've been living in Croatia for exactly half a year, and today I decided to tell you a few things, so in this episode you'll find out, among other things, how much it costs to live in Croatia and what the end of the season looks like in autumn. A few words about the weather in Croatia, and also about what Croatians are like, the formalities in Croatia that are worth doing and those that are necessary if you plan to stay here longer, and in general. Is it worth staying here longer, taking all aspects into account? I mean prices, people, realities, climate, and everyday life. So let's begin. At the start, you're probably wondering what the end of the season looks like here, what autumn is generally like, and whether it's worth coming here during this kind of non-typical tourist autumn, because the typical tourist autumn in Croatia is still in September. Exactly, it's during the first half of September, to be specific. And indeed, there are still a lot of tourists at that time. You could say that the high season is still ongoing. There's still a noticeable number of tourists in the second half of September, quite a large group actually, but the season ends rather abruptly. It seems to me that it wraps up with the last warm days, right when the weather first takes a turn, which this year happened around, let's say, the end of September or the beginning of October. At that point, everything really shut down very quickly, especially when it comes to small and medium-sized restaurants. Some of the larger restaurants also closed. In some restaurants, the menu was limited. You could either just have a coffee or choose from only one type of meal. However, the weather has been really nice. Generally speaking, you could say it's November, and I'm sitting here in a t-shirt. The end of October was very mild in terms of weather. Every day it was 24, even 25 degrees, although the evenings and especially the mornings were already quite brisk, really quite chilly. That's why it's worth coming here at the end. Not even so much at the end of the season, but actually after the season, already in October, or maybe even in November. It's worth having something warm, something with long sleeves, especially if you're planning on active tourism, sightseeing, and this is definitely a great time of year to do that. The first half of the off-season is already really peaceful. Of course, there are still quite a lot of tourists in typically touristy places, in national parks, in big cities like Split, but it's nothing compared to the peak season when you can really feel a significant difference. That's why it's definitely worth it. When it comes to the weather and weather forecasts, it's said that the weather is still reliable in the first half of September, while the second half of September can be windy and rainy, and that's actually true. But forecasts as forecasts go can really vary. Fun fact, in August there were 3 rainy days, while in October not a single day was rainy. It didn't rain at all. The weather was beautiful the entire time. October was actually better than more than half of September, so of course you can read weather guides and use them as a reference. But in reality, whatever happens to you will just happen. Fun fact, this year the Adriatic is cold, or rather it was. The last time I went for a swim was in mid-October. Then I got a bit sick and couldn't do anything. But the water was generally about the same as in the cold Baltic Sea, as usual. Either way, 90% of the people who came here on vacation said that the water this year felt colder, considering the fact that I remember a really pleasant and warm Adriatic Sea when I was here in 2013. When I was here for the first time. Indeed. There really might be something about it. The water in the Adriatic is noticeably colder this year. The life of vlogger is tough. How much does life in Croatia cost? Being completely sarcastic and at the same time telling the truth, it costs exactly as much as you spend on it. That is to say, there's such a wide range here when it comes to basic products like food, groceries, as well as housing, and generally how you spend your time here, that it's hard to determine exactly how much money you need to live here daily. But so as not to leave you with nothing, I can roughly say this. Recently I did some calculations, and over the past month it turned out that for typical grocery shopping, well, groceries and household chemicals, plus occasional trips to the pharmacy, because those happen too, occasional outings to cafes just to have a coffee, and as for restaurants, well, I ate out somewhere in the city, let's say 2 or 3 times. All of that cost me around 350 370 euros, so I think you can assume that if you're spending amount X on such purchases in Poland, you should add at least 20% more here in Croatia, maybe even 30%. Although from what I've seen of Polish prices lately, it seems to me that these differences are slowly starting to fade. I don't know how much you spend in Poland, but in Croatia I spent roughly that amount. As for the amounts you have to pay for an apartment, now I'll refer to Split because I'm somewhat familiar with that market. I myself had an apartment in the area. For 50-60 square meters, you should expect to spend around 700-900 euros. That's the absolute minimum per month. On top of that, of course, you also have to include the utility bills. In my case, the bills for electricity, garbage, water, which I think is included in the rent, internet, etc. They amount to around 60-70 euros, and I can be more specific on that. Internet access here costs about 25-30 euros. If you want to get a Croatian mobile phone number with unlimited internet, the network coverage is quite solid, so you can definitely consider going for something like that. It costs around 25 euros. Personally, I don't use that kind of solution. What I have is enough for me. I mean a home internet connection plus a small mobile data package for when I'm out of the house. As for fuel costs, they are quite high. I didn't drive much this month, only about 450-500 kilometers, and it cost me, if I remember correctly, around 70 euros. So it all depends on your needs. I'm also not including here how you spend your time, right? Meaning attractions, tickets, entrance fees to national parks or other places of interest, or parking in paid zones, because there are really a lot of them. Even outside the tourist season in tourist towns, expect that you'll have to pay for parking. Not a small amount of money. That's why I think, to sum up, if you're on your own and want to live in Croatia permanently, or at least for a longer period of time, I believe you should expect to spend at least 1,200 euros. I think that's a realistic estimate. If you're very frugal and take a strategic approach to preparing meals and you don't really spend much time on activities, although I think that doesn't make much sense in Croatia, then maybe, I don't know, a bit over 1,000 euros, right? Maybe that's realistic. But I think that you really need to have more than the national average to live here comfortably. If you have any questions about specific costs, feel free to ask them in the comments section. What are Croatians like? Croatians overall are very friendly, very helpful, and very curious. Especially when it comes to someone who has already settled here permanently and isn't Croatian. And I want to debunk one very popular myth, that people assume Croatians are only nice when they feel like there's an opportunity to make money and it's tourist season. Then everything is beautiful and pleasant, they smile, they're very helpful. No, Croatians are generally like that. On a daily basis, they seem very open and behave really nicely, especially when they find out that you've decided to settle here. They always ask how you like it, what your impressions are of the places, and what your impressions are of Croatians. Many of them understand quite a lot of Polish, mainly due to tourism, but also because of linguistic similarities, so communication seems fairly easy, just naturally with them. So overall, I would definitely rate daily interactions with them positively. Are they sincere in all of this? I think so. And I found that above all, middle-aged and older people are very kind, very helpful. They can, for example, I don't know, older people might let you go ahead in line at the checkout if they see you have just a few items. I don't want to generalize, but what do you think? Does that really happen often in Poland? I don't think so. More likely it's just some old lady or old man, sorry, mostly an old lady. She'll just ram you with her shopping cart because, I don't know, something about you annoyed her. Maybe it's because I have long hair or because of the way I dress today. Here you don't really find that. Generally here you can feel that southern vibe when it comes to people. And this southernese also comes through precisely when it turns out that, well, you end up living here for a long time. I can honestly feel that change in myself. Often because of it, I end up working longer hours. I work longer because I have this kind of routine where I can just, I don't know, allow myself to go out for a coffee in the middle of the day, purely to relax and then come back to work like normal. And for example, that might take me, I don't know, longer than usual, right? Longer than standard. Like, I don't know, 8-7 hours, however long you guys work. So overall, it's pretty nice. Do you then have less free time? Actually, yes, but that's also really nice because I don't feel as tired. So even if you physically have less time, it's like that time passes in a completely I don't know, maybe at a different pace, that's not quite the right word, but in a completely different way. In the south, you really feel the passage of time in a completely different way. That definitely rubs off on you. So I think that's why Croatians are generally such a relatively laid-back nation, but I also get the impression that sometimes they can be kind of not exactly distrustful, but I think that's not necessarily a national trait, more of a human one. You see someone unfamiliar, so besides being curious, you also have to be cautious. I mean, just look at me. You've got to be careful when you see a guy like me. That's joke. If you're planning a longer stay in Croatia, should you take care of any formalities? Yes, absolutely. Although it might seem that as European Union citizens we can just travel wherever we want for as long as we want within the EU, in practice it's a bit different. The OIB, or personal identification number, is not mandatory. It is your individual number assigned only to you, which you can obtain completely free of charge. All you need is a passport, to fill out a very simple form with basic information, and to take that form to the appropriate office. In Split, it's located somewhere near the city center, and then, within 5 or 10 minutes, the number is assigned to you. What is this number generally needed for? Without it, you can't buy property in Croatia, just like without money. Without it, you can't sign a contract for internet service. It's also best to have this number if you're going to sign a rental agreement for an apartment. So generally, there are a few things you need to take care of where this OIB is required. This OIB will also be needed for another matter you have to formalize if you want to stay in Croatia longer. You see, in Croatia, there's a law that if you want to stay here for more than 90 days and you're a foreigner, but still from within the European Union, you have to register this stay, basically apply for a temporary residence permit. Such a stay can be approved for a maximum of 10 years. And to obtain such a permit, you obviously need to have the form. To get this residence permit, you first and foremost need to fill out the form and have an OIB. If you don't have it, it will probably be assigned automatically during the formalities, but I already had mine. In addition, you need to have a rental agreement for your apartment, notarized. Without that, you absolutely won't get a residence permit. Croatians are very particular about this, so they need to know that you have a roof over your head. Notarial confirmation is not an expensive matter because it costs about 15-20 euros. In addition, you need to have proof of health insurance. In your case, a copy of the EHIC card is sufficient, but still, here's a little tip. It's better to have additional private insurance. I use one myself just in case because it's not true that you have the same healthcare benefits in Croatia as you do in Poland. The reality is a bit different, so it's definitely worth not skimping on insurance. In addition to that, of course, your passport and a copy of it. And there's one more thing you need to have. You need to prove to the Croatian authorities that you can afford to live in Croatia, because they probably know themselves how damn expensive it is. What counts as proof? Sort of like income verification. It can be your bank statement showing that you have substantial savings, or it's also possible to present a certificate from your employer stating that you are employed and that your monthly income amounts to such and such. At this point, probably around 600 euros per month. I think it's enough for them to accept it, but I think it's obvious that it's simply not enough for you to survive here, including housing. From what I was told at the office, it's enough. Above all, the most important thing is to have some savings, so that they simply know here that even if you end up under a bridge, you'll still have money to eat. And you won't just be another mouth to feed from social welfare. All those things can be submitted by email, and only then should you go to the appropriate office. In my case, the waiting time was about a week and a half. After a week and a half, I got an email saying I could now come to the office. The entire procedure is free of charge, unless you want a piece of plastic in the form of a temporary ID card. Basically just an ID. In that case, you'll of course need the appropriate photos and also pay an additional fee for the plastic itself, which amounts to, I believe, 19 euros. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the formalities. So the administrative matters are very simple and not a hassle. So good job, Croatia. Is it worth staying longer in Croatia, considering the overall picture, everyday life here, the climate, the weather, the people, the food? In short, it's definitely worth it. Considering the global situation, mainly the economic one, it turns out that it's not that much more expensive than one might think, of course, compared to our beloved Poland. The climate here is very favorable, maybe not so much in the summer, because I don't like extreme heat. Seriously, what am I even doing here? I think the biggest proof of whether it's worth staying here longer is the fact that my original plan was to stay for 5 weeks, and I ended up staying a bit longer. There are, of course, plenty of reasons for that. But no matter how you look at it, Croatia is really nice, and life here is pretty great. If you have the opportunity, like I do, if you have the possibility, I work remotely myself, so of course it's easy for me to say, but if you work remotely, if you have a sufficient income or some savings, and let's say you're planning to spend part of your life in a southern climate that's also very friendly and wonderful to live in, then you should definitely consider Croatia. Beautiful views, great cuisine, really nice people, and a mild climate. Anyway, of course, I'm very curious to see what it will actually look like in the winter. However, it seems to me that in the countries of Europe, in Western Europe, everyday life is even more expensive and a bit more difficult for various reasons. So Croatia, as a Balkan country that is still very civilized, more civilized than, for example, Montenegro, which I know people also praise, although I haven't been there myself yet, but I'm curious. Maybe someday. So I think Croatia is a really nice golden middle ground, where you can afford to enjoy life a little for relatively little money. Also, keep in mind the fact that people usually come here on vacation and spend a week or two. Obviously, you're going to feel the high prices more because you'll be eating out at restaurants more often, and you'll treat yourselves to ice cream more frequently. I don't know, maybe some nice coffees, though coffees, they're still cheaper than in Poland, so overall, yes, you will end up spending more money, but once you start living here on a daily basis, you simply don't feel it. It's not that terribly bad, so yes, Croatia is quite livable on a day-to-day basis for a longer period of time. I wholeheartedly recommend it, and I hope I'll still have time on my vlog to tell you more about this country. Thank you.